Thank you for listening to Dialogues on Democracy, featuring stories and expertise from IFES's 25 years of providing sustainable democracy and local solutions. I'm Joseph Marcus. As many have witnessed the devastating effects of election violence, it is imperative that local and national stakeholders find ways to mitigate the risks and impacts. I talked with Rakesh Sharma, Director of IFES's Applied Research Center, to discuss election violence. Rakesh, how does election violence manifest itself, and what trends have we seen?
Election violence tends to escalate from about 2 to 3 weeks before the election up to close to election day. It generally declines on election day because you have a lot more security. Election violence can be instigated by a range of factors. So these factors could be related to the election process itself. For example, there's a perception that vote counting was not done with integrity, which may spark election violence, or that candidate registration disallowed certain eligible candidates to take part in the election, which may cause election violence to take place. But election violence can also be an extension of existing grievances or conflicts within society itself. And the election process, because it's such a visible part of the political process, provides an ideal venue for some of these grievances to be escalated and violence to take place.
How does IFES define election violence?
IFES defines election violence as any harm or threat of harm to any person or property involved in the election process or the process itself during the election period. So there's a couple of things I want to note about that definition. One is that the harm that we're talking about is both physical harm that we tend to think of when we think of election violence, such as clashes between political party supporters or riots or things like that, but also intimidation or threats. Threats or intimidation deter participation in the electoral process, and that's why we also conceive of them as forming election violence. The other thing to note is it's not just persons or people involved in the election process, but the process itself. So if ballot papers are destroyed, that is considered election violence because it mars the election process itself.
What are some other areas of concern regarding election violence?
The way we report election violence, the way we monitor election violence is very much focused on experiences in the public arena. Clashes, posters being torn down, things like that, things that are very visible. Women may experience election violence differently, and they may experience it more in the private realm, whether they're intimidated into voting a certain way, whether their political participation in other ways is impacted through what the pressure that their family members bring on them in the home. And so do the tools we have, do the strategies we have, do the monitoring techniques we have, are they adequate to capturing women's experiences when it comes to election violence? And if not, what can we do better?
How can election management bodies, or EMBs, and security forces work together to mitigate election violence?
Well, the general principle is that EMBs and security forces should work collaboratively to ensure security and reduce violence during the election process. The coordination and planning should take place far enough in advance of parts of the election process, such as voter registration, candidate registration, so that effective implementation of these training plans can take place during the election cycle itself. One of the initial ways they can do this is just have a very comprehensive analysis of conflict triggers. What is the conflict environment in the country? What can cause conflict during the election process? What are some steps that can be taken to reduce election violence? Other examples we have seen of EMB and security forces working together is planning and training for the election process. So that security forces are aware of electoral procedures, what takes place on the ground on election day at polling stations, so that security forces, security personnel can better coordinate their actions with polling workers and other electoral officials who are working.
Access to technology has increased in many countries. So how have these technological improvements helped mitigate election violence?
Availability of cell phones in almost all countries in which we work really make them an effective tool to more quickly report and document incidents of election violence. Crowdsourcing also is made possible by use of cell phones and quick transmission through SMS messaging, etc., to get information about violence that may be taking place. The reports can be more easily and quickly circulated through website tools such as Ushahidi. So we can use technology to get this information out quickly, whether it is through cell phone or other means. What it allows is EMBs, it allows security forces, others who are responsible for ensuring security during the election process to more quickly respond to emerging trends, to emerging sort of instances of violence where they may be happening.
For more dialogues on democracy or information about IFES's election violence monitoring, please visit our website, www.ifes.org.